Thorfinn's best friend is somewhat controversial. On the one hand, a lot of anime fans find him annoying, and a lot of manga fans were upset when they saw Einar in episode 4. But when I asked everyone on Twitter if people actually hate Einar, all I got were responses like Einar is a strong person or Einar is a good friend. So I want to go over the reason everyone eventually falls in love with Einar, despite the fact that he's controversial. And when I say controversial, obviously that includes the recent anime controversy. But it's not like that's the only problem with Einar's character. Oh, and if you haven't noticed by now, this is going to contain some spoilers. Anyway, there's a list of reasons why you might not like Einar. First of all, he's... well, okay, I don't really know how to say this on YouTube. Einar is... well, he's a shrimp. Not nearly as bad as some of the new anime fans are making it out to be, but yeah, he's definitely a shrimp. Dude was getting ready to escape again, and then he saw Arnheid, and instantly he's just like, you know, I've got it pretty good here. Can't really complain. Which to a lot of people is just a funny thing he does. They laugh about it, and then they don't pay much mind to it. But I've seen plenty of other people talk about how it bothers them. Which, to be fair, when you look at some of the ways it makes Einar act, it does kind of make sense. Again, he did kind of forget the position he's in at Kettle Farm, literally just by looking at Arnheid. Just boom, instantly forgot why he was pissed off. Then later on, he picked up an axe in a split second and was all ready to fight Snake, one of the coolest and most badass characters in this arc, just because he's so madly in love with her. Forgets that his family was murdered by Vikings, that his village was constantly under the threat of war, and that violence just ruins people's lives. So there is a legitimate case to be made for why this would bother someone. Because it's one thing for Einar to be in love, but on these occasions and a few more I'm probably forgetting, Einar will suddenly compromise everything just for Arnheid. Which makes you wonder, is Einar actually a bad character? A bad character is whatever you decide, but something we can all agree on is that a character is usually poorly written when they contradict themselves, when they act in ways that go against their core beliefs or personality traits, to such an extent that it breaks the suspension of disbelief. As we just explained, Einar does seem to be contradicting himself in these instances, so you could make that argument, but I would actually argue that it falls in line perfectly with his character. Let's start with where we see him in episode 1. We see him with his sister and his mother, and specifically, what is he doing? He's chopping trees so that he can train to defend his family and the village. And notice what they say when they sit down to eat. They say that Einar's father, presumably his role model, died protecting the family. So when you take this so-called training and the lesson from his father, what you get is the impression that Einar has been instilled with a desire to protect. His father died protecting his family, so the implication is that having a family is so valuable that it's worth dying for. So from that, Einar is given this strong desire to have his own family and protect them. At first it was his mother and sister, but then it becomes Arnheid. And that, I think, is why he's so in love with her. Because as soon as he sees her, he sees the potential for a family he can love and protect. And this understanding of Einar's character explains his seemingly contradictory behavior. When he grabs an axe to fight Snake, it's not so much that he wants to fight Snake as it is him willing to die to protect Arnheid. And that's part of his appeal. Einar wants a family to love and is willing to die for the people he cares about. So it makes him a very likable character. But that doesn't mean he's perfect. While this interpretation answers some of the issues with his character, there's actually a much bigger problem. But before I explain what that is, make sure to like the video if you've been enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, even though Einar is a likable character, there's just one slight problem. Einar is slightly annoying. A big thing I'm seeing with people is that they find Einar's behavior annoying. There's really no one way of putting it, but by the time Einar gets to Kettle Farm, he's kind of established as like a complainer. Like, he's not this loud person who just never knows when to stop talking like Gabby from AOT, but he has this thing where he'll just start going off in a way where it comes off like complaining. Now, to be fair, I think anyone who's dragged away from their home and forced to work against their will is at least entitled to a pissy attitude, but it's also just the way he does it. Like, Einar will scream and shout and he'll get really confrontational, but he really never has a plan. He doesn't really think it out. In the beginning of this arc, a lot of what he does is either charging someone 5 seconds before they kick his ass, or going on about how bad war and violence are, which is understandable. But the problem is that he's with Thorfinn. He tells Thorfinn how much he hates Vikings, and for the most part, he can see that Thorfinn is a decent guy. Then he suspects that Thorfinn used to be a Viking when he sees him fight, and instantly accuses him, which again, pretty reasonable considering he was spot on. But then we get to that scene. Specifically, the scene in episode 4, which does take place in the manga, but is taken a bit further in the anime. In the anime, Einar goes over and strangles Thorfinn in his sleep, and continues to do so when he sees Thorfinn suffering before he stops himself. Before this point, any issue he might have had with Thorfinn was understandable. Thorfinn was a Viking, Vikings ruined Einar's life, anyone in that position would be pissed off. But to take it this far, to take it to this level of violence, is just dumb. Especially considering Einar just met Thorfinn, and there's a strong possibility Thorfinn had nothing to do with his village. So you can see why some people, especially anime-only fans, would have a legitimate issue with his character. He's often confrontational, and he's just a little too quick to hurt our favorite protagonist. But that's in the anime. In the manga, Einar goes over to Thorfinn, makes a fist, but then stops himself when he sees Thorfinn suffering from a nightmare. He even goes as far to say that something is wrong with him for wanting to do what he almost just did. So, two similar scenes, but in this one, Einar is much more compassionate, especially in the end. In the anime, he does make a bit of a comeback where he tells Thorfinn he's wrong for thinking there's no reason to be alive, and that it's a good thing that they can eat and talk about nonsense. In the manga, Einar doesn't make that big speech, but he does end by saying that he and Thorfinn are friends. And this line is a big part of why people like Einar so much. Regardless of which scene you prefer, both of them present Einar as someone who goes out of his way to help others. In the anime, he tells Thorfinn that life is worth living. In the manga, when Thorfinn is like, dude, why are you helping me? Einar says that's what friends do. And that's what Einar wants to do. He wants family. Part of that family is Thorfinn. Eventually, he and Thorfinn come to call each other brothers. It's not just pals or buddies. They are two men who have both suffered together, who both want the same thing, and want to support each other in reaching that goal. And the key word here is support, because that was a problem I've had with Einar, and you might have noticed it too. While Einar is an important character, he also doesn't do a whole lot. Like, he's always right there with Thorfinn, but in the farm arc, he just does a lot of screaming and shouting. And he doesn't do a lot more than that in the next arc either. So you get to this point of like, you know, I like Einar, but what is the point? Why is he even here now? Well, besides the fact that Einar is important because he has a lot of valuable farming experience, it's that idea of support. He and Thorfinn have a very give and take relationship. Funny enough, Thorfinn does a lot of the support in farmland. He's constantly reminding Einar of why it's pointless to fight someone, and supporting him when he's angry because of what happens to Arnheid. After this arc, that's what Einar does for Thorfinn. He's always there for Thorfinn. In fact, there's a really beautiful scene later in the story, where Thorfinn and his group are getting ready to travel and gathering resources. Einar comes out to chat, and Thorfinn tells him how his father, the man who said a true warrior needs no sword, still kept a sword around because he knew that, you know, he's Thor's, he's that guy. People are gonna want to fight him. So now Thorfinn is in the same position, and he wants to avoid having to do the same thing. And Einar doesn't come up with some clever solution, he doesn't give him any advice. He just tells him, just remember, when you feel like you're forced to use that last resort, remember that I know who you really are. Not the savage warrior that everyone thinks you are, but the kind person who wants to make the world a better place. And when Einar admits that what he just said probably isn't that much help, Thorfinn responds and says that it was exactly what he needed to hear. And that is the value of Einar. Because the value of a friend isn't that they're necessarily a person that's capable of all these incredible feats. The value of a friend is just having another person that affirms who you are and what you want simply by their presence. And that's the value of Einar. He isn't this badass right-hand man that cuts down all of Thorfinn's enemies. In fact, Thorfinn has to save Einar from his own big mouth. And Einar isn't like a genius tactician either. What Einar contributes is his presence, his support to Thorfinn by affirming his true nature and his true desires. He brings out the best in Thorfinn and reminds him that he isn't alone in his efforts. That is the value of Einar, and that is why, despite his flaws, everyone loves him. But maybe you disagree. Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on the community tab. And if you'd like another Vinland Saga discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my video on Canute where I discuss his role in farmland. You can find it in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.